Andrew, I wanted to get started by saying I appreciated in the first episode that I listened to you talking about how you were a little reluctant to even dive into this story, this case. Tell us why.
I was super reluctant to get into it because I'm in the media and I have been, I've been a journalist for 30 years and I felt like I had consumed a fair amount of media about the case. And from what I'd consumed, I think that I was pretty certain that I agreed with what I read, and everything suggested that Michael Skakel was the man who, in 1975, murdered Martha Moxley with a golf club. And so, as I think I probably mentioned in the first episode of the podcast, I got an offer from Bobby Kennedy Jr. to write a book that was expressly about um, exonerating him, at least in the public's mind. And I was torn because, obviously I've watched the Kennedy family for a long time, and I know a lot about the Kennedy family, and although I admire a lot of what they've done, I also think that there's been a lot of bad behavior in the past by the Kennedy family, and I think that there's been a lot of whitewashing of activities by the Kennedy family. So. I was in a bit of a moral quandary because I found it interesting. Bobby Kennedy had contacted me not about co-writing a book, but about helping him research and doing some writing on a book, so my name wouldn't be on it. But I thought to myself, am I really going to be part of this machine to whitewash somebody who, in my mind at that point, was obviously guilty? And so, as I said in the episode, I talked to my wife about it a lot. I talked to my therapist. And the way I began to think about it was that it was hard to pass up an opportunity that interesting, and also that my name was not going to be on the product, and I could treat it as though a defense lawyer who's defending somebody who might actually be guilty would treat that, which is keep your mind open and maybe look for holes in the case and see if maybe there's any there. And as soon as I got into it, I discovered indeed there's quite a bit of there.
Was there one particular thing that changed your mind? Like one day you remember you saw one, bombshell that said, wow, this is it? Or was it a series of things that you uncovered as you kind of put on the objective lenses and re-looked at everything?
I think I spent upwards of a month in an evidence room just, going through these probably tens of thousands of papers. And I would say it's an accumulation of things. I mean, I think one of the things that I think I mentioned in the pilot was I had done a good deal of research before I even decided to get to the point where I would go and look at the evidence. So I had read three books on the case. I had read mounds and mounds. I mean, there was, hundreds of stories written in the media. I do. That's my first step as a journalist. I'm sure it's your first step that if you're going into sort of a major story, you consume everything you possibly can. So before I did any looking at the evidence, I consumed everything from the media I possibly could. And then, as soon as I started looking at the evidence, I thought to myself, boy, I never read anything about this. I mean, there's one example in the first episode, which is, it was a very, I mean, obviously it is a horrific crime. It's a 15-year-old girl who was murdered. And it was a very, very bloody crime scene. I described, I think, in great detail what was done to her when she was attacked. And, I looked at the photos and it was, I'm not a crime reporter, but I've seen gory things before. I'd never quite seen anything like it. And what was very interesting about all of the reporting in the case was that although it was an incredibly bloody crime scene, there was never any blood identified outside of the crime scene, or even suggested that there was blood outside of the crime scene. And when I was going through the early police reports, I found a report that specifically mentioned some blood found in Belhaven, which is the enclave in which Martha Moxley lived, which I'd never heard about. It was a total mystery to me. And I'd read books that were hundreds of pages, and I would have thought that it would have had some glancing mention at least of this. So, that was one of the first things that kind of got my spidey sense tingling, which is why hadn't anybody reported this before? Because it was obviously interesting, especially given the amount of blood at the crime scene and the fact that whoever had done this obviously probably would have been very bloody, and would have left some residual blood, and there was no blood found anywhere else. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily the key to solving the case, but it just did seem like an oversight that so many people had studied this, but nobody had mentioned this in the same reports that were available to me.
Yeah. So, Alexa, as the executive producer, I would imagine that you're kind of doing a lot of the research, booking the interviews, trying to find people that know the facts and the timeline of all of this. As you delve into this, what stood out to you? Like, what made this particular story interesting?
Well, our process was a little bit different. This is NBC News Studios' first partnership with an external journalist. So actually, Andrew brought a lot of the reporting to us, and we've continued to research and report alongside him. He'd done a tremendous amount of legwork across his almost decade of reporting on this story, and there's always more to be uncovered, and we continue every day to find new things, really. I mean, it's just there's so much information in this case, and I think that that sort of answers the second part of your question, which is when Andrew brought us the pilot that he had sort of crafted on his own as a evidence of this story and what it could be, I was just absolutely hooked right away. I didn't know much about the story. I didn't have any real sense, of its depth and breadth in terms of the time that it unfolded across, in terms of all the details, in terms of all the suspects over the years. And so that part was really fascinating. But just from a sheer true crime standpoint, I've done a lot of true crime. I really haven't encountered a story like this that's so rich and so full of twists and turns and so layered. Every time you turn one rock over, there's rocks underneath to keep turning over. I mean, it's really it keeps you so engaged and so invested, and we continue to be challenged by it. I, for having worked on it now for over a year, and Andrew for 10, and we still can find ways to just sort of jam on it and talk about it and find one little detail to debate and to chase around. So, I think that's one of the things about this podcast is the episodes are long, they're very dense, they're full of information, and there are 12 of them, and we still feel like, there's more to tell, but we're doing our best and trying to do justice to the story in these parameters.
I personally was so happy to see that there was 12 episodes. And when I clicked on episode one, it was nearly an hour because I love the deep dive. I hate it when you go through like a 4-part series and you're still asking a bunch of questions. And the fact that you were able to
Oh
sit down with
God, thank
Michael.
God, Nate. I am so glad to, I've been so scared because I need people. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh, that's all right.
it warms my heart to hear that. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Please
that's
continue.
me. If it's good enough and I'm interested, I want it all. And then I saw that you actually got Michael Skakel, the suspect who didn't serve time, was convicted of this crime to speak. I don't want to give away too much, but how did that come about where you were able to actually sit down with him, get him on the record as he denied that he had anything to do with this?
Um, well, I don't know if I misheard you, but he actually served 11 and a half years in prison
Right.
he was convicted. And I think that, Michael, I think, one of the things that I think that we'll be discussing, I mean, this is partly a media story, and I think Michael feels um, very much like the media has painted a portrait of him that isn't really accurate. And I think he's been just generally distrustful of the media. And so um, Michael, as any good defense attorney, probably would have cautioned him. Michael was told for many, many years. I mean, he actually wanted to. He didn't testify in his trial, but he said that he wanted to, and he's wanted to talk for years. But he's been really constrained by, initially the fact that he would be answerable in at his murder trial for anything he said, and then after that, because I mean, there's a lot of reasons why somebody wouldn't want to go talk to the media. And I think when you meet Michael, you'll probably understand why maybe his attorneys might not have wanted him to talk to the media because he's very plain spoken and probably nothing like what you imagine. And so I think meeting Michael that first time in 2015 and listening to his story and actually having somebody, I think, um, who was open to hearing what he had to say, and he had so much to say that I feel like over that decade, maybe a level of trust was built between us that perhaps. I mean, I know that organizations were constantly, news organizations were constantly approaching him about cooperating. And I think it was very easy for him to look at what news organizations, those same news organizations before had said to him in things that he thought were either inaccurate or unfair. So I think it was just a question of getting his trust over a period of time and becoming um, I mean, I hesitate to say that that we're friends because he is a source of mine, and I think that you're going to find this a very fair portrayal. But I've spent a lot of time with him, and so when you spend a lot of time with somebody, you develop a certain level, a kind of an intimacy.
Right.
And I think it was just a question of him dying to tell his story, but just not being able to recognize what would have been a good outlet for it.
What questions do you still have, Andrew, having worked on this for a year or no, 10 years, having worked on the podcast for the past year? I mean, were there questions answered as you all put this together that you had been, really anxious to get answers to?
I have like 3 episodes worth of questions. Alexa, maybe you can hit that for a second so I can think about it for a second because I have so many. I'm trying to think of like a good example of a question that I still have. Um,
Yeah, what about you, Alexa?
Well, I think you'll agree with this, Andrew, that one of the big questions is around the initial investigation and the holes that were left in it that weren't the things that weren't done by the Greenwich police originally because they were not accustomed to dealing with murder and they didn't have experience with this type of case. And what slipped through the cracks in those first 48, as Andrew references in the first episode, but also beyond that, in the first days and weeks and months and years of this case, what got lost? What will we never find? What will never be known? I think is such a big question mark hanging over this entire case and this story. For me, that's the biggest thing. I think that will be the hardest to answer because time, it's been 50 years. I mean, time's going to probably not reveal certain answers to certain questions that we have. And the older the information and the older the part of the story, the harder it is to chase down.
Right.
and I think that what's going to be possibly fascinating and for true crime listeners is that I'm going to take them along on I think the journey that I took a little bit in terms of kind of discovering things along the way. And I think that they will share the same questions that I have and the same sort of, Greenwich was not, no fault to any particular Greenwich cop. They just were not accustomed to investigating a case like this. So I hesitate to blame them, but I think that there's going to be all these lost opportunities wherever, but where I think listeners will be kicking themselves and thinking to themselves, "Oh God, if only they'd searched this place, or taken the clothes of this person." I mean, there's going to be a ton of questions that I think I think as you listen to the series, you're going to probably have a lot of the same questions that I continue to have.
Right.
I would
Well,
tag on to that. Oh, Nate, just one more thing. I think for listeners, one thing that's really amazing is, Andrew had access to the case file in a way that no other author had access to before. And so what we've been able to do and what's so great about telling the story in this audio format is that we have original archival materials and audio tapes from 1975. I mean, these are original police interviews. It just gives the podcast so much texture and really transports people back to that time. You're hearing these kids' voices talking to the police back in 1975. It's really powerful. So I think that's one thing that listeners can look forward to and be excited to sort of immerse themselves at every chronological stage of this story because it was widely covered all 50 years. And so we are incorporating that and weaving it in a way that really brings it to life.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
Nate, I
Yeah.
do have to mention, I mean, the podcast was uh, I did produce a pilot, which ultimately got into NBC's hands, which has just been such a boon. Not only because I got to work with and meet with Alexa and the amazing team there, but when she talks about the texture, not only is it the archive that I was able to bring, but NBC, of course. NBC News has this amazing archive of interviews with all of the figures, interviews that I never in a million years working with any other non-major network news organization would have had access to. So not only are you going to get the texture of the old interviews, you're going to be able to hear things from ABC, NBC News's archives that's just unbelievable. And sometimes I listen to an episode and Alexa will surprise me with something, and I say to myself, I can't believe you found that is unreal.
Yeah.
You guys must have a really, really amazingly searchable archive. So,
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
I think I just feel so, I mean, it's very cliched, but so blessed to have found this as a partner.
Right. Yeah. To bring together the two forces. I got to tell you, I like it because I was not familiar with the story. And those are the type of stories I like. If to come in cold, I don't Google anything. I don't, look up anything. And so the fact that a lot of our viewers may not have been familiar with it, especially here in Idaho or in the West, uh, it should lend to some really good listening over the next few weeks. Is there anything that you guys want to add?
Well, that's sort of what I love about what I think I'm going to love about this is actually my kids, my very grouchy, I have a 15 and 16-year-old, so this story has taken special resonance in the last couple of years because it deals with kids who were 15 at the time,
Mhm.
but they actually like the show and they don't like anything. And I know that people who live in Greenwich, even friends, I've heard from intimates of Martha who have said, "Gosh, I didn't," even from listening to the first episode, "Gosh, I didn't know that." So I think that even if you were living in Belhaven at the time, you're going to learn something. But I think that it's going to be presented in a way so that if you'd never heard about the case, as my sons had never heard about the case, I think it's going to, I hope, grab your attention in a way that it grabbed people's attention for the 5 decades uh, that it's existed. I mean, this was a cold case from 1975 until 2002. And in this part of the country, it was a very big deal, not only because of the tragedy of it and the age of the victim, but because of the fact that um, it involved cousins of the Kennedys. It involved nephews of Robert F. Kennedy. So I think we have a little something for. I think we have a lot of something for everybody, actually.
Right. Alexa,
Alexa,
what
what do you?
about you?
I mean, I think that's perfect. I do think what we can be really proud of with this is it's incredibly immersive storytelling. I mean, to Andrew's point, I really think that just a story well told is so engrossing, and this story lends itself to that. And Andrew has an amazing writing voice and speaking voice. I haven't told you this, Andrew. Somebody told me you sounded like Anthony Bourdain.
Oh
So
man.
yeah.
I'm looking seriously. I'm just all I want to do. No, I'm joking. Is cash out and become a voiceover artist. No, I'm joking. That's not really. I don't
But
think I have it, but I do. You know what I have? I think I have a face for radio.
Well, it's
well,
personal. I like the fact that it's personal. I mean, you kind of the episode I heard, you let us into your life, the struggle you had in your mind of whether you should even pursue the story. You mentioned going to your therapist, talking to your wife, talking with your family. I kind of like that when the curtains peeled back a little bit and we get to know the person behind the story, which is what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep that to a minimum. I think the story is much more interesting than I am, but I do think that there's absolutely, I'm very proud that NBC has allowed me to maintain my voice. I think it'll be in certain ways opinionated, but one thing I want to do is allow the reporting to speak for itself. I would like people to hear it and not feel like I'm trying to drag them in one direction or another. And I think that as the series goes on, I think it's very possible that people are going to make very, very different conclusions about what happened that night, because that's the greatest mystery of all is what happened, around 10 p.m. on October 30th, 1975 in Greenwich, Connecticut. That's the thing that's the biggest question actually is, it's somewhat dark, but I mean sometimes I just think, gosh, if only I could sort of see what actually happened.
Right.
Because even if we know who did it, there's going to be a plethora of mysteries left over.
Right. Well, thank you both, Andrew, Alexa.